officially welcome you all to episode 2. I already mentioned that I messed up. There was another oversight, so I'm actually having to record episodes 2 and 3 at the same time. Basically, there is a bunch of stuff I want to talk about in the Hunter's Dream, but it requires the monocular. And that's not till after what I was planning on showing for episode 3. So this episode is going to be some weird future time travel shenanigans where I'm going to come back here in the future after I get the monocular to show off stuff inside the house. But for now, yeah, let's get to showing off the doll. You'll remember last time I crushed a madman's knowledge to gain some insight, and now that we have, the doll is alive, I suppose. I guess you can call it alive. It's hard to say, really. It resembles life. It's pretty cool, though. Let's see what this is. This is the beckoning bell and silencing blank. These don't really say too much in regards to the lore, other than that they establish that there are interdimensional planes, either linked within the dream or with space and time itself, although the natures of dreams in the series is kind of bullshit and how it's simultaneously reality and not. So it's basically a huge mess, but I kind of dig it. It's a neat concept. Like I said in episode 1, I like it when games use that kind of stuff to explain their mechanics, even if it does get a bit hand-wavy. This is the Old Hunter's Bell. This was added right before the Old Hunter's DLC came out. It basically lets you summon additional NPC hunters to help you out. Originally, there was a hunter in Central Yarnum that you could summon without it, but I think it's now geared so that you use this spell instead. I'll be showing him off on another character, but not this one. It's going to be in episode 3, but don't worry about it for now. We can. Okay, so now I've cleared that out of my head. We're going to talk to the doll. We're going to talk to the doll.
Hello, good hunter. I am a doll, here in this dream to look after you. Honorable hunter, pursue the echoes of blood, and I will channel them into your strength. You will hunt beasts, and I will be here for you to embolden your sickly spirit. Farewell, good hunter.
Now, it's kind of interesting that she refers to herself as a doll. She doesn't give herself a name, and for that matter, neither does Gehrman. Neither of them refer to the doll by any particular name. I think there are some lore implications to that, which I'll get into later. I just thought it was kind of interesting. It could be nothing. It could be that the doll is well aware that she's a inanimate object to people without insight. Maybe us being able to see her talking is just a result of the onset of madness. Maybe not. Probably not, honestly. But, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. She also mentions that she seeks to embolden our sickly spirit, which I think is the first hint as to the mysterious illness for which our hunter has come to Yarnum in seek of a cure. And like I mentioned before, I don't think it's a physical ailment that he's seeking a cure for, so much as a psychological one, be it depression, a lack of purpose in reality. This is like, I have two, I guess I can't really call them theories, hypotheses on who the protagonist is in relation to the world. One possibility is that it's sort of like the Polaris story from H.P. Lovecraft, where it's somebody from one reality slipping into another because they find the world that they lived in too sinister and dreary to enjoy living in, so they seek escapism in another world. Basically what I'm saying, it's the player. The player is literally the character in the game. I know it's kind of a no-duh, but it's kind of interesting depending on how you think about it. I'm not sure if I'm really a fan of that explanation, but it's interesting. Like, to literally say the player is the hunter in the game seeking escapism and calling them out on that. It is an interesting feat. I think that's, I don't think that's something Miyazaki would actually have done, but who knows, maybe he did. The other theory I'll have to go into way later because it relates to some major lore points that'll crop up in the second half of the game. But for now, we'll look at the stuff that I was equipped with at the very beginning of the game. I know I looked over the armor before, so I'm not going to really look at that too much right now. So we'll take a look at the Hunter's Mark. This is on you immediately, similar to how the Dark Sign is always present on you in the Souls series. Dangling upside down rune etched in one's mind. Symbol of a hunter. By focusing one's thoughts on this rune, a hunter loses all blood echoes, but awakens afresh as if it were all just a dream. I mentioned this before, I believe, that using this will act as a homeward bone, but it'll like take away all of your souls that your echoes that you've accrued, similar to how the Dark Sign and Dark Souls would take away all your souls when you used it. So basically, never use it. But it's also the lore explanation for why you're unable to die. Anytime you're about to die, that rune, whatever it does inside your head, it basically makes you wake up from reality into an earlier state in which you were alive. So it's some kind of time travel dream shenanigans. It's interesting. I'm not gonna dwell on that too much because I already talked about how I like that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's neat. There's a bit more depth to that, so I'm gonna have to go through my notes. Just bear with me for a moment. The recording fucked up. But fortunately, I didn't lose anything important. Should cut right after I said something about me having to check my notes, which is fortuitous, because that gave me some time to process it a bit better. As I mentioned in episode 1, the Soul series and Bloodborne both draw some inspiration from Norse mythology. It's not as obvious in Bloodborne as it is in the rest of the Soul series, given that the Soul series has like direct throwbacks to Odin and Thor hurling lightning bolts and killing dragons and whatnot. I don't actually know Norse mythology too well. I brushed up on what seemed relevant, and what seemed relevant was the Hunter's Mark, as I just mentioned. Now, as I was saying before, for one thing, it works is that it's a plot contrivance for why you're able to stay alive during the hunt, even if you die. This sort of dream nonsense. But it also has a double meaning. One is one of the in-game explanations as the blood running to your head, which is something that you can notice among a lot of people, a lot of the Yarnamites and other hunters you come across. The beasthood brought about by the blood has gotten to their head. They've become, I don't want to say mad, because I guess madness would be the right word, but it's not insanity like what can be obtained from insight, but it's both to the same means, as the Hunter's Mark is also a reference to the Hanged Man Arcana on tarot cards, which is itself a reference to the story of Odin hanging himself willingly from the branch of Yggdrasil in the pursuit of knowledge, and to call forth runes. Now, I don't know what runes themselves are in Norse mythology, but from what I've read, it seems that they have a similar effect to runes in Bloodborne, in that they grant special abilities and can work as a form of communication of sorts. Basically, in the myth, Odin stares into a pool of shadowy waters below him while hanging from the tree. and calls forth the runes from which... I guess I'll just quote this verbatim. Then I was fertilized and became wise. I truly grew and thrived. From a word to a word, I was led to a word. From a work to a work, I was led to a work. Equipped with the knowledge of how to wield runes, he became one of the mightiest and most accomplished beings in the cosmos. He learned chants and enabled him to heal emotional and bodily wounds, to bind his enemies and render their weapons worthless, to free himself from constraints, to put out fire, to expose and banish practitioners of malevolent magic, to protect his friends in battle, to wake the dead, to win and keep a lover, and to perform many other feats like these. Now, I don't think it's much of a coincidence that the overlap of Lovecraftian stories and Norse mythology mention the cosmos in this way. I don't really have much more to say on that, but what does strike me is that the runes gave him the ability to heal emotional and bodily wounds, in the same way that this hunter's mark, which is itself a rune, prevents bodily harm permanently by reversing its effects by making the reality in which you experience them a mere dream. And it also helps to seek you heal from your emotional wounds, in the case of the doll, who assists to embolden your sickly spirit, to encourage you, to make you psychologically stronger and more capable of coping with the realities that you face. It's kind of an uplifting message, I think. It has an interesting... Like, I always wondered how the Hunter's Mark tied into the overarching plot, and I'll get into that much later, because that's major spoiler territory, but it's basically a mark of nourishment. The dream seeks to help you grow as a person, and it's possible that the blood may get to your head in the process. It's a possible result of one of the endings. The other ones, I'm not really gonna get too much into that, but yeah, you can see why the Hunter's Mark has a lot more to it than most people seem to immediately think. Most people just stop at the blood running to the head, which, you know, it's fair. This game's all obsessed with blood, but yeah, it's interesting. You also may notice the mentions of the echoes of blood, which the doll mentions. What are blood echoes? Why do you mention blood echoes? Aren't those just souls? Why aren't you calling them souls? Because, I looked into what blood echoes are, and I gained a bit more respect for the word. It's still clunky and more difficult to remember than souls, sure, but, basically based on several item descriptions, some of which I probably don't have, for, like, cold blood dew. Echoes imbibe the blood with thoughts of reverence, indeed gratitude for their victims. So you're basically taking on the essence of what made the people that you killed them, whether it be through the act of killing them by hand or by taking their cold blood from a corpse and then internalizing the dying wills of those that you've killed. It's interesting. It's similar to Souls in a lot of ways. Basically, mechanically and lore-wise, it more or less is Souls, but it's more... I guess it's more symbolic in this rather than literal. Like, I guess in the Souls series, Souls themselves are more symbolic to, the strength of the soul rather than a literal count of how many actual souls you have, which is my take on how souls work in those games, Demon Souls included. But with echoes, it seems like the accruing of blood echoes itself is a form of respect towards the people and the beasts that you kill. Which I actually like, but I guess there's no real point to that. It's just kind of interesting. I know a lot of people don't seem to know what blood echoes are, so So I just thought I'd explain it. It doesn't really matter a whole lot what blood echoes are. It could explain why the blood brings out the beasthood in man, because when you take in the blood of other men and beasts, you're also taking on the latent beasthood that was inside them, or whether or not it was actually latent. Like, if you're killing a beast, I guess it's no longer latent. You're internalizing their beasthood. Hence why blood arts, like blood rapture, visceral attacks and stuff, are so enthralling to the hunter, and why many hunters indeed succumb to blood and let it get to their heads, because they're basically quantifying the beasthood which they're taking on. That's about all I can say on the matter. It is pretty interesting. As for Madman's knowledge, I said I was holding on to this, but it's basically a skull of a madman touched by the wisdom of a great one. It's a skull damaged by making contact with the Great Ones, the gods of this world, and we'll find out more about that later. But as it says, making contact with Eldritch Wisdom is a blessing, for even if it drives one mad, it allows one to serve grander purpose for posterity. And as we can tell, the effects of insight are indeed quite potent. The lifeless doll of the dream has sprung to life. And we'll see many other effects of insight as we proceed. I kind of like insight as a literal take on the idea of what you don't know can't hurt you, because it means it quite literally. I'll be showing this off a lot later on with my church hunter, because he's the one I'm going to accrue all the insight on, and this character I'm just going to waste it all on fire paper and maybe some other things. Don't worry too much about that. But yeah, before I dive too much deeper into the Hunter's Dream lore, I'm going to start recording episode 3, so I will be back in a flash, for you anyway. For me, it's probably going to be at least an hour, probably more. Enjoy my suffering! Boy, am I stupid. I completely forgot to finish the doll's dialogue. Thanks, commenters, for pointing that out. Not that
Welcome home,
you
good
would have known
hunter.
that I didn't catch on to that.
What is it
Yeah,
you desire?
let's check out the rest of her dialogue.
Did you speak with Gehrman? He was a hunter long, long ago, but now serves only to advise them. He is obscure, unseen in the dreaming world. Still, he stayed here, in this dream. Such is his purpose.
Now, I mentioned this
Farewell, good
before, how
hunter.
Gehrman is more or less trapped in the dream. Whether or not you see him all the time is kind of irrelevant, because regardless, he's always present. Where exactly, I don't know. Maybe he's hanging out in that gated-off area. But yeah, he's no longer alive in the waking world from which we come from, or as the doll calls it, the dreaming world. Which is kind of peculiar, because she normally does refer to it as the waking world when we're going into it. But she refers to it as the dreaming world in regards to Gehrman, perhaps because he can only exist within the dream and it's no longer a waking world for him, because he's no longer a part of it. Alright, let's finish up her dialogue.
Welcome home, good hunt. What is it? Ah, the little ones, inhabitants of the dream. They find hunters like yourself, worship and serve them. Speak words they do not. But still, aren't they sweet?
They certainly are,
Farewell,
doll.
good hunter.
They certainly are. Even little old vagina face down here. Yeah, there's not really a whole lot of lore on the messengers. I think they're actually related to an ancient race, which we'll get into later. I don't really feel like talking about it right now, because that's a lot to dive into, and that's going to be more or less a whole series in this. It's going to be a sub-series on its own. I'm going to devote an entire thing to the Chalice Dungeons. There's a lot to talk about, but it's basically an ancient race, and they bear a strong resemblance to it. And by race, they were more or less the ancestors of humanity, whether or not other Bloodborne fans choose to acknowledge that as true. I don't really care, because it seems to be in evidence, but I'll dive into that much deeper later. Yeah, with that, I bid you farewell, and I'll see you when I get the freaking monocular.
What's that smell? It's episode 2.
Okay. I'm actually getting really tired of that joke, because I've been saying that to some of my friends in real life, completely out of context for no reason. Probably because I'm just going insane, but I'm kind of getting tired of the non-joke. So, yeah, I got Gascoigne's armor already. You'll see that in episode 3. I'm actually recording this after episode 3. Don't worry about it. It's because I made a mistake in the episode planner. Nothing too major, but it involved me having to start recording episode 4 as well. I needed to get the monocular. Didn't miss anything lore-wise. I'll show off how you get this thing. But there's some stuff I want to talk about in the Hunter's Dream. I know I touched a bit on the Hunter's... Actually, I guess I'm already in episode 2. So, this bit is going to be after episode 3. I'm getting my own continuity all fucked up. So I guess I'm future me? And the me at the beginning of the episode that did another introduction is past me? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I've got some stuff I want to touch on in regards to the lore in this place. It's kind of a pain. I honestly should probably buy a lantern real quick, because otherwise it's gonna... Actually, I got a torch. Torch will be fine. Torch will be fine. Don't worry about the torch. There's no lore to it. Use the burn beast. That's it. We're gonna be looking at these shitty book textures. I hope you guys like shitty book textures. Ugh. Now, I spent close to 6 hours on my practice run trying to figure out what the hell these things say. I was only able to make out about half of them, but I was able to make out the book titles. Brutus de Claris Oratoribus, or was it Caesar de Claris Oratoribus? One of them's real, one of them's made up. It's a reference to a real book, basically covering the oratory of Julius Caesar. Doesn't really have much to do with the lore, I think, although it may have the lore parallels in regards to Gehrman. We'll find out later that he's an associate of Lawrence. Lawrence is somebody that betrayed somebody before, and perhaps he also betrayed Gehrman on a separate occasion that was never explicitly stated. From the sound of the lore tidbit that we'll find out later, perhaps Lawrence was supposed to free Gehrman from the stream after he formed his contract with the Great One that presides over it. But other than that, I don't really know much else to say in regards to that. It could also be in reference to how the education of the healing church isn't as accurate as it once been. As we'll find out, they've corrupted old phrases that were the central pillar of the church, but that they no longer follow. I'm sorry if the camera's distorting. I'll take off the monocle for now since I'm just bullshitting. But yeah, there's not really a whole lot to say about it. Great oratory was possible with the freedom from any power, more precisely in the anarchy that characterized the Roman Republic during the Civil War. Like I said, it doesn't really have a lot to do with anything, Miyazaki might have just put there for no reason, because I don't know if they actually intended us to bother reading these books. Though given there's a book called How to Pick Up Fair Maidens or whatever, I guess they did plan on us to overanalyze this stuff. But I guess they didn't think to improve the texture so I can read all of these. But it's whatever. It's whatever. Now, I'm going to have to pause because I'm going to have to scroll through my notes real quick. Just give me a second. Alright, I'm back. Sorry about that. Let's look at these other books. Now, there is a book over here that's just labeled Alchemy. It's going to be the Red Book and the Crosshairs. Took a little while to make that one out. 5th edition. I can't really find anything in real life that parallels that. I don't think it's referencing any book in particular, unlike Claridus or Toribus. But alchemy is somewhat of a key feature to the lore in Bloodborne, what with Quicksilver Bullets. Quicksilver being the, I guess it's the alchemic name for mercury, being used as a special medium. We actually transmug the mercury into various other substances depending on how we use it. Like with the flamethrower, it'll turn into flames, needless to say. It can be used to form cannonballs, amongst other things. Used for magic. So, I'm not really sure why they're bullets. I guess it's just for simplicity's sake. But they're Quicksilver, first and foremost. Now, other implications to that may also be that it could be related to the god Daedalus from, I believe, Greek mythology, that utilized Quicksilver and infused it into wooden figures to allow them to movement. This could possibly be an allegory for the doll of the Hunter's Dream. And Daedalus could be in reference to Gehrman. I honestly don't know enough about Greek mythology to fill you in on Daedalus. I'm putting a lot of research into the game, but I'm not about to give a history lesson or a mythological lesson or whatever. You'll have to forgive me on that. But going off that, I think that perhaps the hunter could also be a reference to or maybe it's the church and Lawrence that would be a reference to Icarus. They reached too close to the sun and ended up getting burned, which in this case would be more in line with they tried to force their way into becoming great ones and ended up being ruined because of it. Lawrence, as we'll find out, became a cleric beast like we'll be fighting later, which is a result of him wanting to become a great one by utilizing the blood rather than through acquiring insight. It's a huge mess. It's a huge mess. Honestly, the more I think about it, the more upset I get. But it's interesting. I do like it as an explanation for the doll, because I guess I'll show this off. Sorry, doll. She bleeds white. It could be that that's Quicksilver. So the Quicksilver inside of her could be what's keeping her animate, or it could have been used as a medium to imitate life. It's just kind of an interesting way to explain how she came about. It's probably just me reading way too much into a book just titled Alchemy, but it was interesting, as it's more of a tangent on Quicksilver than it is a tangent on alchemy. Now next, I could only read a little bit on this book cover. Let's see if I can find it. Ah, here we go. That book reads 1872. I can't make out the title of it, but that does help us place the time frame in which this game takes place. I'll dive more into the implications of that in episode 3 or 4, when I take a look at the architecture of Central Yarnum. But it's kind of interesting. Also interesting is the Declaris Oratoribus, which I already talked about. The real-life equivalent was written in 1889, or published in 1889, I should say. So, I guess we can assume this game takes place sometime after then. These books are present in the other version of this place that we'll find later on. So, it could be this place, you're visiting Yarnum during the 1900s or something. Because these books most likely belong to Gehrman back before he got brought into the dream and eventually died. So, interesting that the Victorian era style would carry on for that long. Technology didn't really seem to advance. I think it's safe to assume that this game takes place at least 100 years after the events, or 100 years or more after the first hunts of Gehrman and his groups. That would give enough time for the message of the healing church to become corrupted, although really it was kind of corrupt to begin with. So yeah, let's just work on the assumption that it's at least 100 years after. The progression of technology halted by the Scourge of Beasts, perhaps. It's hard to say. It's clear that the Scourge of Beasts stretches outside of Yarnum, as we'll find out from lore from other NPC and item descriptions. Hell, Gehrman himself is not from Yarnum, so... Not Gehrman. Gehrman's from Yarnum. Gascoigne's not from Yarnum, as he's part of a sect of the Healing Church that resides outside. He's a Protestant member of the Healing Church. So he is the Protestant equivalent of the Cleric Beast. I'll talk about that more later, but yeah, that sets the time period for this game. It's just kind of interesting. It also means that there's an America, or of some sort, maybe not in name, but that's where the Declaris Oratoribus was published. So there must be a Bloodborne US equivalent somewhere, which is really strange and really interesting. There's no way to read into that beyond that, because we don't interact with anyone that could be from there. But it's there. I think it's neat. And the last book I want to talk about is one that reads Kong Willem 1042. This is an old way... Kong is an old way of referring to a king. So this would be King William. It also says love. I'm not really sure what the implications that is, but it's referring to an event in 1042 or 1041. Not being a historian, I was only able to scrape the surface. So if I get anything wrong, correct me in the comments, whatnot. But the only connection I could find is his relationship with William the Conqueror's relationship with Edward the Confessor. This could be a hint to how the relationship with Gehrman, the Moon Beast, and Lawrence went, but I can't really dive that much into it. There's not really much to look into there. King William was intended as the heir to the throne after Edward the Confessor. Not knowing the blood lineage, it's not clear whether... I don't think Edward had children. So I guess you could say that King William paralleled him as a surrogate. Perhaps in reference to the Great One of the Dream, the Moon Presence, and Gehrman? That's really it. This is kind of a short episode. I got a bit rambly. There's also this thing. This thing drove me nuts, but then I got into the Chalice Dungeons. Basically, it's from there. There's no real implications. If there are more implications about the statue, I'll talk about it when we get to that part of the series. But for now, I'm tired, and I talked about everything I wanted to from here. Sorry if it got a bit rambly. Hopefully it was alright. Enjoy episode 3. I think things will get a bit more interesting for you there. See y'all next time.